Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe. I'm the founder and editor of Kevin MD. And today we have Jay Wong, who is a first-year medical student and a recent contributor to Kevin MD. He's written several provocative stories for the site. And I want to welcome to the show. Jay, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, tell us a little bit about your story, and what brought you to where you are now.
Again, my name is Jay Wong, and I'm originally from Long Island, New York. So I was born and raised there. My parents actually immigrated here from China back in the late 80s. So I'm Chinese by ethnicity. And I'm actually also first generation to go to high school and college and to medical school now, which is really exciting. I went to undergrad at Yale, and I graduated a couple of years ago, and now I'm a first-year medical student at the University of Michigan Medical School.
And this is probably a first year, unlike most first years. How are you managing through the pandemic, and how's your class managing?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a transition. I mean, everything's now online, so it always takes a little bit of a period to acclimate. But I think it's nice to not have to be in class all the time. I get to just be back at home and with people that I really love and care about. So.
Medical school has changed since I went. I went to medical school back in 1999, and we had to go to these lecture halls all the time. And I talked to medical students like within the last 5 years, and a lot of them they just show their videos and then they run it through at like 5 times speed so they could just view everything pretty much online anyway. So has it been a huge change from like the beginning of the year for you?
So to be completely honest, I pretty much stream everything. I don't even think I've gone to maybe a single day of lecture. Actually, I take that back. I think I may have gone once.
All right.
So that transition was pretty easy for me. I didn't have to make that much of a big change. But I mean, there were still mandatory classes, which now we don't have to do anymore either. So for me, it's pretty minimal. I think for those who go to class all the time who require that type of didactic style, they're probably going to have a little bit of a tougher time. But for me, I think I'm pretty good.
Sure. So you've written several stories on Kevin MD, and you share a lot about your personal life and about your travels. So tell me about your story about becoming a writer and sharing some of your stories on social media platforms.
Yeah. So even when I was really, really young, I always loved writing. I always loved to, in fact, I actually wanted to become an author when I was a lot younger and
All
write
right.
books. So it was never in my sort of purview or in my dreams at the time when I was a young kid to even become a physician. And because I always felt like writing was a way to talk about a reality that is not, um, it was a medium through which I could connect with other people and really use my voice to express something that either isn't there
Hmm.
or a story that other people have not lived. It was allowing me to sort of not only be a storyteller, but to connect with people on a really intimate level and to share experiences that, they would otherwise not have. And the only way they can
Sure.
get that experience is through my writing. And it wasn't until I went into medical school and going into medicine that I realized I was sort of not engaging with that part of myself that I valued so much growing up, which is being able to write stories and connecting with people. And so I felt like I wanted to return to that a little bit. And I
Hmm.
felt like this was a good way, writing, for your publication, that it allowed me to sort of marry my two interests and passions together, which is medicine and, connecting with others through writing and storytelling.
Now, did you have a lot of opportunities to write during undergrad when you were at Yale, or even during the first few months of medical school?
hmm So I think during my undergrad, I spent most of my time, if I was writing for English classes, for
Mhm.
like
Sure.
major writing or like writing for like like a Bible class that I was taking.
Hmm.
So and then all the creative writing stuff, the stuff where I could just be write whatever it was that was on my mind. That's mostly came out in like Instagram posts or like
Sure.
Facebook statuses. So that was the extent of the my ability to write, free form during that time. So
Sure.
unfortunately, didn't get to exercise that as much as I would have liked.
Well, I think it's fantastic that you're writing so many pieces, and I certainly encourage pretty much every medical student to write because that's what medicine is. Really, it's all about stories. It's all about our patients' stories, especially, but our stories as healthcare clinicians as we're going through this long journey. We have to be able to tell our stories as well. So I think that's fantastic. So I do want to focus on one of the stories that you wrote for the site. So I'm just going to pull it up here. And it was written earlier in May, and it was titled "A Vaccine Alone Will Not Be Enough to Recover from the Impact of COVID-19. Emotional antibodies against it are needed as well." So tell me, what are emotional antibodies? Tell me how this story came about.
Yeah, so in terms of just the ideation of emotional antibodies and the genesis of the concept and the immunology of resilience, that really came out of a conversation that I was having with a friend one day that was completely unrelated to COVID-19, actually. It was just about, we were just talking about suffering in general, like human suffering, and why
Mhm.
it was that we noticed in our personal lives, like people who had endured so many such great states of human privation, how they were able to be so strong and able to just overcome, while others sort of were crippled
Mhm.
by it and cowered and crumbled. Like, what really made that difference? And we felt like suffering wasn't something that was bad. It was actually,
Mhm.
we kind of talked about how the gift of tremendous suffering, and how suffering is kind of the sandpaper that I think shapes us in
Sure.
many ways. And what makes the difference between those who cower, crumble, are crippled by it versus those who don't are, in my mind, are people who were able to forge meaning from it and
Mhm.
build some sort of identity from those experiences. So they were proactively taking what they were experiencing and gaining, not only trying to find meaning, but forge it,
Mhm.
and really go after making sense of something and turning all that as bad into something that was good. And every time you do that, I think that we actually build what I call emotional antibodies.
Sure.
So basically, what that is essentially antibodies, and just like how we serologically, whenever we are attacked by an actual microbial
Mhm.
pathogen, we mount antibodies against that. I think experientially, when we experience things that are traumatic, um, or things that make us suffer, and we are able to somehow shape that experience into something that makes us better
Sure.
or sort of improves us in some way, we also build up sort of a sense of immunity, and like sort of a immunity in terms of our resilience, and that manifests itself as emotional antibodies, such that when we recognize or see similar experiences or endure similar hardships or adversity in the future again, we are more apt to similarly or analogously launch an immunological reaction emotionally to these things, so that we can fight it off and overcome it.
Now, there was a great quote in this article, which I think articulates that proverbial fork in the road that you're talking about. I want to read it to my audience right now. And you write, "It has been my experience that there is a bifurcating pathway with which we can navigate our interplay with an adverse event. We can either cower, crumble, and be crippled by it, or we can face it, fight it, and no matter what the outcome is, forge positive meaning from it." And I think that's really the choice that you were talking about in terms of taking meaning from an adverse event. Now, when someone's going through an adverse event, sometimes they don't have that gift of perspective. They're not thinking, this is going to help me in the future. What kind of advice can you give to someone who's going through an emotionally adverse event at that moment?
Yeah, I would say that for anyone who's going through something that where it's really traumatic and really difficult, that the answer lies within yourself, and and that I mean, we can talk to other people and get advice from other people, but just in terms of the big picture, I think
Mhm.
it really is incumbent upon us to find the answers within ourselves. It's a lot of it. I think it's about situational reappraisal and cognitive reorientation, where we try to see, it's not just about finding the silver lining, but it's about forging
Mhm.
something out of that negativity. I mean, there are so many people that I know, for example, who have been in prison for a really long time, and or and sometimes you wonder, how were you able to maintain such positivity and
Mhm.
optimism while you have been imprisoned for so long and endured so much hardship. And a lot of them sort of say that they have taken that time that they were in prison to really work on their like thinking, and that prison gave them a space and a medium through which they can really spend time reflecting and sort of building their emotional and mental musculature. And so they were able to take that time of imprisonment and turn it into and forge it into a time of contemplative thinking
Mhm.
that really sort of helped them emotionally actualize. So they took something that was what one might perceive as so traumatic, as being sort of left in a solitary sort of confined space for so long, and changed that into something that really contributed to their life in a positive way. So I
Sure.
think anyone who's suffering can probably forge something out of what they might perceive at the time as nothing.
Sure. Now you're just starting out on your medical journey. You're first year medical student. So the concept of emotional antibodies, I guess, in your journey so far, what's an example where that concept and construct has helped you?
Yeah, so I think what I would probably link this back to, just because I feel like it's super relevant, is I mean, with just COVID-19 in general and the pandemic, I think that right now more than ever, as I was a medical student, I was seeing a lot in the news and the media, just this almost like this pursuit, this hot pursuit towards getting a vaccine, towards having a biological cure. And I feel like more germane than ever is the idea that that is a really reductive and self-limiting solution. A vaccine itself, a biological one, is not going to be able to ameliorate the damage that's going to be left by the vestiges of this pandemic. And what I really wanted to sort of convey is that, you know, a vaccine is but a blip in the stratosphere of what it's going to take to overcome the strife and the trials that have come out of this. And that in order for us to really just move on and really grow from this,
Mhm.
we have to recognize the individual and collective despair that happens on a day-to-day basis since the incipience of this pandemic, and recognize that we have to take that despair and repurpose it and weaponize it even to our own advantage. Whether it's taking this global pause and
Mhm.
this hunkering down period as a time to recognize that it cannot be a squandered opportunity to really build on our psychological and spiritual selves, so that we can tackle on a lot of these things like vicarious trauma, emotional
Mhm.
assault, and learned helplessness, which I collectively call the trifecta of emotional assault.
Well, no, that's fantastic insight. So I just wanted to shift gears and just ask you, what are you currently curious about now? What are you currently passionate about right now?
Yeah, so personally, I mean, this also goes back to why I write and to begin with. I really enjoy telling stories about from the perspective of um, uh, the underdog, but not only
Mhm.
just the underdog, but also stories that I feel like are really controversial or are hidden or are considered. Um, just like the stories of the disenfranchised and the
Mhm.
disempowered. So I'm really passionate about like sex positivity, which is something that, you know, in the realm of like the medical profession is still something
Mhm.
that I don't want to say taboo, but
Sure.
in terms of its like norms and mores, I would say it's a little bit more on the unconventional side, and there's still a lot of headway to be made there. Things related to, I mean, I recently wrote a piece about um, chlamydia and
Mhm.
like STIs. And I mean, just the idea that talking about,
Mhm.
having had an STI, for example, that's something that's super, it seems like controversial and could be seen by others as too much. And so, just really trying to be a vanguard and a pioneer and a change agent in those areas that are not on the fringe, but on the side of being the part of communities or populations that are frequently sort of disenfranchised and disempowered.
And that's so true. It's really you as medical students who are going to be the vanguard of that change because you don't need me to tell you that how that the medical culture today is just so conservative, and it's really up to the medical students and younger physicians that can bring about that change. What do
Exactly.
you wish you had known that you do now when you're first starting on your medical school journey?
Wow, that's a tough one. So many things.
Yeah.
I wish I could have done so many things. Um, I wish I could have known that, um, hmm, that, uh, that making friends, real, true, genuine friends, would be a really challenging thing. I think
Mhm.
we are so often we are, in school we're taught all these subjects like math, science, like physical education, all these different things, but we're never taught exactly how to make a friend, which I think is so critical, right? Every
Yeah.
one of us, we're social creatures. We evolutionarily are built to engage in some way with someone other than ourselves. And so often I think we are left disillusioned or frustrated because our social relationships aren't working out, and we
Mhm.
kind of expect them to because we think that, oh, just because we're human and just because we're social, therefore we are privy to having some sort of insider knowledge about how to cultivate or foster these relationships in the most perfect of ways. And when expectation is not commensurate with reality, we immediately like sort of are frustrated with ourselves. But then we take a step back, and I think it's so important for us to recognize that we, as a civilization and society, are not taught how to actually make these relationships and what it takes to actually make these relationships work. And I wish I had given myself a little bit more self-compassion a while back.
Mhm.
Um, just and try not to put too much, stock
Mhm.
in how things would pan out, and just let things flow and not be too disappointed.
Well, it's fantastic insight, Jay. Thank you so much for being on the show. I'm going to give you the last word. What's a message that you want to give to my audience?
I think the biggest message for me is that just don't ever underestimate the power of, your voice. The greatest weapons you have are your voice, your minds, and your hearts. So really use that and use the person that you are and the person that you become to help others and change the world.
Fantastic. And how can readers get in touch with you?
Yeah, so you can reach me by I have my own personal website, so it's called therealjaywong.com, and I also have a Twitter, and that's Jay Wong Medicine. And I mean, there's also Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, which you can also find on Kevin MD on my personal profile page. So
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your stories and insight, Jay. And stay safe and good luck on your medical school journey.
thank you so much.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Take care.